J. Barber.
J. Barber.
This is a talk about working for Barber. Barber said, all activity except that which is intelligently designed to attain God realization creates a binding for consciousness. It is not only an expression of accumulated ignorance, but a further addition to that accumulated ignorance. Yeah, what a beautifully clear, concise and simple statement. From the basis of one's existence, the breath, to the most complex mental activity. The entire process of life is accumulating ignorance when unaccompanied with the longing, thankful remembrance of God and the goal of union with Him. And there are those key words intelligently designed in the active remembrance of God, which are so clearly important. Erich, Meyer Barber's close disciple, has spoken on work as he has gathered from his many years with Barber. How hard should one work? Meyer Barber always wanted us to remain occupied, and he would say that that work which makes us forget ourselves and think of him more is the best work. He wanted us to remain occupied, you see, and work very hard, trying to forget ourselves in our work, whatever be our occupation in life. And while doing so, to keep constantly in the back of our minds that the work we are doing has been given by Barber himself. And our part is to do that work well. Barber has given us the example of a person who is on the stage and has to act his part. For example, he may in his daily life be a beggar, but he is given the part of a king on the stage, and he has to play his part so well that he really becomes a king for the time being, making the audience feel his authority and so forth. Likewise, Barber wants us to know that this whole world is a great stage erected by him, and we are to act our part and role in it and play it well. And we will play it well only when we remember that our part in the play is but a role which we must act out to the best of our ability. I know all, the present and future, and nothing can stop the work that I am here to do. Be patient, be calm, be steadfast and firm as a rock in your faith and love for me. I can then use you for my work of divine love, for the uplifting of humanity. In thinking about this subject of work, there are also stories from spiritual tradition which remind one of aspects of the challenge. Intelligently designed activity in the role that God has given, as in the story of St. Paul of Thesis. During a time of severe persecution, when many Christians died by torture and sword, Paul, a youth of about 15 years, an heir to great wealth, fled to the country to escape death. He was well educated, of a gentle nature, and a strong lover of God. Then, realizing he was to be betrayed by his son-in-law, he fled further and further into the mountains, there to await until the persecution subsided. Gradually over time, Paul became more and more attuned to a solitary life and to a loving concentration on God. And finding in the mountains by chance a huge cave screened by a stone, settled there for the remainder of his life. After a little distance, the cave became a spacious courtyard, open to the sky, roofed by the wide-spreading branches of an ancient palm, and with a spring of clear water. Here in this beautiful home provided by God, Baba lived his life in prayer and solitude. How he lived in detail, God knows, although it is recorded. Each day Paul would gather palm leaves, and even though he lived beyond a place to sell them, would weave such a measure of woven baskets as though he lived by it. When his cave was filled with his work, he would burn it and begin anew his labours. Thus he helped to maintain his focus and perseverance in love for God in the face of loneliness and lack of worldly stimulation. It is recorded that there he dwelt for 113 years. It is the heroism of obedience and love, not of pride and willfulness, which is the most heroic and the most moving. The true hero leaves no witnesses and no reward. He does all so that the light of love and obedience be not impaired. Meher Baba has given a wonderful message that applies to us all, applies to all work or to all activity. Work undertaken with honest intent and love for God is Baba's work, and those who do this are always his. But the greatest work is to live a life of love, humility, sincerity, and selfless service in which there is no trace of hypocrisy. Baba's love is for all, and for each of his lovers to help others know this. His or her own life should be a radiating example of love so that it may become the instrument to spread Baba's love and the truth of reality. Such a life and such a love are vital and carry the highest responsibility, for behind every thought, word and deed is the all-pervading force of truth. To cultivate discipline in oneself requires self-determination and honest effort if one desires to tread knowingly and consciously the path of love. The discipline may at first appear dry as dust, but with perseverance it will automatically blossom and be transmuted into the very life of the lover. To help others through one's own example, one must get not only thoroughly drenched, but drowned in love. As a prelude, one should attempt to create a balance between the thoughts of the mind and the feelings of the heart. Mind, however, works much faster. Thoughts are like lightning, first the flash and later the sound of thunder. For an equilibrium to be reached, the mind, which is the seat of desires, must be made to function more slowly in order to keep pace with the heart. And no amount of silence or fasting can accomplish this. If an individual desires the enforcement of equilibrium in the true direction, a consistent acceleration of feelings should be made so that feelings supersede thoughts. That is, the heart supersedes the mind. To achieve this, the only effective fuel is love, unadulterated love. Unless one learns to love in its true sense, one cannot cross the hurdle of the mind. And for one to understand love in its true sense, the only recourse is to dedicate oneself to the Lord of love and to hold fast under all circumstances to the feet of the perfect Master. Any deviation from self-dedication will lead one astray from the path of divine love. Baba's love is with his lovers always, helping and guiding them. And they should keep their love for him alive and aglow by making him their constant companion in all their thoughts, words and actions, while carrying on their responsibilities, commitments, and all other apparently necessary things of this world, though these have no foundation of their own in the domain of reality. As in the story of St. Paul of Thesis, who, even as a young age, had truly left the world, or, as it could be said, the world had left him, so again in this story of a young, devout Muslim blacksmith. The saint, as a young man, and before he knew of his spiritual destiny, loved a girl so desperately that he could not compose himself. He was told of a Jew who could assist him in his need. The Jew advised that he must not pray for 40 days or obey God in any way, nor do any good deed. He must always not mention God's name or form any good intentions. If this is done, then he may be able by magic to bring about his desire of winning the girl. So the young man carried out the instructions for 40 days, but the magic that the Jew then devised did not work, and he declared that the man must have done some good, otherwise his magic would have worked. The young man thought and assured him, "I have nothing wrong, I have done nothing. But as I came here, I kicked a stone from the roadside so that no one would trip over it. That is all." The Jew replied, pay heed to God. Even you have ignored the command of God for 40 days, yet in his love he did not let that minute goodness you did go to waste. These words struck a deep chord within him, and he turned wholeheartedly to God as never before. He was a blacksmith and continued his trade. But now in his intense devotion, the money he earned he gave to the poor and to widows. Then at the time of the prayer of sleep, he would go begging and break his fast on whatever was given. This he continued for some time in secret, concealing the magic, the miracle, I should say, of his awakening and his vows of discipleship to the divine beloved. He was thus working in his shop one day when a blind dervish passed by reciting from the Quran, "I take refuge with God from the accursed Satan. in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Yet there would appear to them from God that which they have never reckoned with. His heart was gripped, and he became so carried away that he put his hand into the fire without using the pincers, and drew out a piece of iron. Seeing this, his apprentice fainted. When the blacksmith came out of his state of ecstasy, he left the shop forever, saying, I left work and returned to it. Then work left me, and I never returned to it again. It is only God who in his providence gives and takes away. In Islamic literature it is written, whoever feels joy in serving Allah will see that the whole material world will take joy in serving him. The eyes that shine with the light of Allah will give light to the eyes that look upon them. I feel we touched, albeit briefly, the ideal of working for beloved Baba when we in Australia prepared for his visits, and also for some years following his turning of the key in 1967, and was then continued for a few more years after he dropped his body. The following are some thoughts written later as I reflected on those years.